Those were the two hardest decisions probably in the history of this firm. But if I don't make those two decisions, I'm not sitting here today talking to Jeff Hughes on his podcast, because I don't have the business I have, and I'm an afterthought in this world instead of a thought leader.
Well, hello and welcome to the J. Sterling Hughes Show, where we share the straight truth on how we have rapidly scaled a family law practice from 0 to 25 attorneys and doing over $15 million in revenue. And my purpose here is to document what's working and what's not working in our practice, with hopes that you can take that and you can recontextualize that for your practice and shorten your success curve. And today I'm super excited. I've spent the last half hour in talking to Jonathan Breeden of North Carolina, who's got a really successful firm there. And so I asked him to come on the show today to do two things. One is he has a great story about how he built his practice to himself plus an additional 7 family lawyers. In addition to that, he's also formed a hyperlocal podcast, which I think is a highly overlooked tactic for local attorneys that want to build a network in their local community, because there's very few hyperlocal podcasts. And so Jonathan had his podcast going for about 4 months now, Jonathan, and I think you've had some really, really cool results that we're going to share here today. So first off, tell us a little bit about your story, how you built your practice, and how you got here today.
All right. Well, it's great to be with you, Jeff. My name is Jonathan Breeden. I am a family lawyer in Raleigh, North Carolina. My primary offices are in the suburbs of Raleigh. We do have an office in downtown Raleigh, but our primary offices are in the counties surrounding Raleigh, in Johnston and Harnett counties, just southeast of Raleigh. If you've ever been down the East Coast, I-95 and I-40 meet very near my office, and those are the two biggest interstates, I think, in the United States. So if you've been through this part of the country, you've been not far from us here in Johnston County, where my primary office is. And we have 6 other lawyers. We do have 4 office locations, but we only staff now, after COVID, the 1 location in Garner. The most famous person from Garner is Scotty McCreery, the country music star who won American Idol 10 or 12 years ago, and he still lives in this area. You see him around. He's a huge NC State fan, just like I am. He goes to Wolfpack games all the time, and he's just a regular guy, and he's a really nice guy. So anyway, so we're out here in one of the fastest growing areas in America. That helps. Raleigh being the number 1 place to live in America by most of the surveys that are out there, depending on whether it's U.S. News, Money Magazine, wherever you want to look. So, in a fast growing area, which always helps, when you're trying to grow a law firm. And, we've been out here. I came here in 2000, straight out of law school. I'm a 1996 graduate of NC State, big Wolfpack fan, and excited that they're going to be in the Final Four. And we're going, then I went to Campbell University's law school, which is now in downtown Raleigh, right next to NC State. But when I went to it, was in about 45 minutes south of Raleigh, near Fort Bragg. And came out of there in 2000, and I came right here to Garner, right here in the outskirts of Raleigh, in the suburbs of Raleigh, and started a family law practice there. And the rest is kind of history. So we can go into the more specifics of what we did to start or whatever, but it's been a heck of a ride, I can tell you that. I'm extremely blessed to have had the success I've had. I've made a lot of mistakes, as we all have, but I didn't quit. And if you don't quit, then the game's never over. We're playing an infinite game here, Jeff. And if you just learn from your mistakes and keep going forward, eventually you'll be successful.
So when you got out of Campbell and you started in 2000, did you start on your own, or were you with another firm at that point?
No, I started on my own. And unlike most people, I went to law school to start my own law firm. And I went to Campbell because Campbell had a start your own law firm program. Wow. And it was the reason I chose that law school. I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'd watched my father build a small accounting business in Laurinburg, North Carolina, which is right on the North Carolina-South Carolina line, not far from south of the border, for people that have driven down 95 and seen the Mexican-themed sideshow of rides and hats and stuff they sell on the side of the road there. Very nice families on that for a long time. I'd watched him do that, and I quickly realized, my mom was a nurse, and her schedule was completely inflexible because you had to work when you had to work. And my dad had a very flexible schedule because he was working for himself, so he could come to all my ball games and all my plays and all of that. And that meant a lot. And I knew if I was going to be able to do that for children that I hoped that I would have, that I needed to probably work for myself. Not that I don't play nice with others, but I have very set ideas of how I think things should be done, Jeff. You probably do too. And so, and if you're not being done that way, I'm not going to be very happy about it. So I probably should have worked for myself. And I'm glad I recognized that at a young age. I'm glad my parents recognized that in me at a young age, saying, we don't care what you do, but you really want things done the way you want them done. So you might want to try to do something where you can work for yourself.
So today, your firm is almost exclusively focused on family law. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
When I started, it was not, but it is now.
Yeah. So walk us through that evolution of when you started and what led you to start focusing your practice and what happened when you did that.
Right. Well, when I come here in 2000, I'm 25 years old. I don't really know anybody. I'm not from this area. And I got on all the court-appointed lists. And I knew enough about law to know that it's got to be cash and carry, right? If you're starting a firm, you need to be able to make money today and do work tomorrow. So I knew I needed to do criminal law, family law, or real estate closings. Those were the three easiest cash and carry things to do. And real estate closings, in one of the fastest growing areas in America, you could do those all day, every day, but I didn't want to do real estate. A HUD form's 108 ways to get sued. And I didn't like that. I wanted to be in a courtroom. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. So I came here and I got on all the court appointed lists. And we didn't have a public defender at the time. And shockingly, we're just now getting a public defender in July of 2024.
Wow.
So I got on the court-appointed list. I got on the criminal court-appointed list doing misdemeanors. I got on the abuse, neglect, dependency court-appointed list, representing people, whose kids have gone into foster care with Department of Social Services. I got on the child support court-appointed list. I got on the mental health court-appointed list.
Wow, you're a hustler.
I got on any court-appointed list that there was to get on to try to A, learn, and B, create some income. And I didn't have a single employee for 2 years. I did it all myself. I was a single guy. I forwarded the calls to a StarTAC flip phone that had a little antenna. Jeff, you probably had one of those.
I did.
And I would be in the court, and I would walk out of the courtroom, and I'd say, "This is Jonathan Breeden," and people at the courthouse mocked me because that's how I answered my phones.
Yeah.
And I didn't start out to do family law. I really wanted to do criminal defense, but I ended up out here in the suburbs because I did have a professor tell me in law school. He was the guy who taught Start Your Law Firm. He said, look, if you're not from a community, don't be across from the courthouse. Go out away from the courthouse where there's going to be nobody else from that area as well. You're talking about, I'm in a county that in 1990 had 60,000 people. Johnston County now has 250,000 people.
My goodness.
30 years. This growth rate is insane. And so I didn't go across from the courthouse where you had the same 6 lawyers and their families and their daddies had been lawyers and all that. I came out to the suburbs where I thought there's nobody is from the suburbs because my office used to be a freaking cow pasture in 1990, right? So that's what I did, and that actually worked. And the reason I started doing family law is that's what was starting to show up. That's what people were calling me for. And I was like, I want to eat. And as I did it, I realized I didn't hate it and I could deal with the emotions of it. I used to listen to that Dr. Laura show. I think she's still out there where she people in their relationships, right? And I used to listen to her show and Laura Schlesinger, I think she was.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot just listening to her show. And I ended up saying some of the things I heard her say to people as I was counseling them, because family law is probably 80% dealing with emotions and people and 20% the law. And, and then I had this thing where I found that I really liked helping children. And, I was helping, especially when you're on that abuse, neglect, dependency list. You're helping children get out of bad situations and possibly helping their parents get them into a better situation. We had a couple of custody cases early on where we got some kids out of some tough spots and into the custody of some grandparents. And I got a great feeling from that. You know what I mean? Like I gave my efforts gave this child a chance that they were not going to get if we didn't get them out of the home they were in. And so that sort of drew me to family law by doing it. And I just started doing more and more of it. But I didn't give up the court appointed work until 2007. And I probably wouldn't have done it then, except I hired a paralegal that had been at one of the bigger firms in Raleigh. And she was like, if you want to be like these Raleigh lawyers that you look up to that have success and, successful practices, you got to quit going to court every day. They never go to court. They like study the rules of civil procedure to stay out of court. And you're there every day representing, criminal felonies. You're having to try an attempted murderer. Like she's like, you can't do both. Either you're going to be there at that courthouse or you're going to be here working your cases, because the people you want to be like don't go to court. And I was like, what do you mean they don't go to court? She's like, they don't. They work the cases out. They bill hourly in their office. They go to court as sort of a last resort. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. And so I got off of the court appointed list and started focusing solely on family law at that point, and some retained criminal work that came in. And that's when the business really started to grow, because once again, you've talked about previously on this podcast, you got to be the CFO, the chief focus officer. And once I started to focus in on family law and not worrying about DWIs and all that stuff, the business started to grow, at a pretty good clip.
So is that when you hired your first associate to work with you?
I did not hire my first associate until my wife was pregnant in 2009, because I was working all the time, and this is before I find a business coach or Richard James or any of this stuff, Partners Club, any of that. Like, I'm just trying to figure this out. So I did hire my first associate in 2009, and I placed them on the court appointed list. And back then there was, the economy was bad and there was a plethora of lawyers. And so I think I paid the first associate $35,000 a year. And I largely used her as a paralegal. I didn't have a paralegal. She was cheaper than a paralegal who knew what they were doing, and she could cover court for me. So, and so I ended up having a series of associates from 2009 to 2015. They would stay a year or 18 months, and then they would move on to go do something else, make more money, whatever. But in 2015, the business started to go backwards because I had a fine law website. And anybody listening can go Google about what happened to fine law websites between 2013 and 2015, where they got really punished by Google because of some of the backlinks they were doing and stuff like that. And my site really stopped working, and my leads dropped. And so when my associate left in 2015, I did not replace her. And I brought my wife up here to help me, and my wife became a paralegal because that's what I could afford, which was my wife to come up here. And so she was up here acting as a paralegal while my daughter and son were in preschool or in school. And everybody listening has probably got a story about how their wives have had to help them. I was listening to Michael Mogul's podcast this morning about him working with his wife and stuff. So anyway, that was a turning point, because that fine law contract came up and that site was not working, and I had to decide what I was going to do. And my wife, we interviewed different website companies, and we were trying to choose between a company out of St. Louis that was connected to a Yellow Page company that we knew of, a local Yellow Page company, not the actual Yellow Pages. And this company we found by calling other websites that we were looking at in Raleigh, and we called the search engine guys in Austin, Texas, and we were like, well, you have the #1 website in Raleigh right now. What can you build us one? And they're like, we cannot, because we have a non-compete in that market. But they recommended that I go to Postali in Columbus, Ohio, who at that time was an up-and-coming website law firm marketing company. And so we switched, and we actually hired them in January of 2016. And they looked at my website, breedenlaw.com, and said, this is so bad and so punished by Google, we're going to have to start over. You're going to have to get a whole new domain, and we're going to have to start from scratch. And that's when I got breedenfirm.com. Now, those are two of the hardest decisions I've made in the entire 24 years, Jeff. I had to leave Fine Law, who I'd been with for 12 years, who had built me good websites and had made me money, and switch to some young guys in Columbus, Ohio, wearing funky hats with earrings in their, earrings in their nose, right? Like it was, but those are artists, right? These are young guys. They were on it. You know what I mean? Not all of them, but they had some employees like that, right? Like it was like, I had to make that switch. And that was hard. I was scared to death. I mean, my website was 90% of my business. I'm out here in the suburbs. Those were the two hardest decisions probably in the history of this firm. But if I don't make those two decisions, I'm not sitting here today talking to Jeff Hughes on his podcast, because I don't have the business I have, and I'm an afterthought in this world instead of a thought leader.
Yeah. Wow. So that was a turning point in January of 16. You hire Postale, they rebuild your site, and then you just start, I'm assuming, growing pretty significantly since then.
Correct. But here's the thing though. At the time, I didn't know anything about numbers, right? I didn't know anything about leads, set, shows, hires, conversion rates, workflows. I didn't have Clio. I was still tracking billing on the inside of a paper file, writing it down. I mean, wow. and when it came time to make a bill, we typed that in to an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, that's where I was at that time. So I did not know whether I could reproduce each month what I was starting to produce, because I didn't understand the numbers of how I was producing what I was producing. So I was afraid. I was afraid to hire. I was focused on scarcity. I couldn't move forward. So I ended up just working all the time.
Wow.
And I was working like 7 days a week. And because I was in the business, not working on the business, and I had no view above. All I was doing was trying to work the cases that were coming in. And I had this fear that the next month the phone wasn't going to ring, and I'm still in short-term debt. I mean, I got car payments, I got house payments, I got student loan payments. I got all of this stuff. I got business.
Yeah.
I got business lines of credit. I was not able to immediately get out of that debt, and I didn't understand what was happening because I didn't know how many leads I had before, and I didn't know how many leads I had now. All I knew was the phone was ringing, and I was trying to get the work done.
Yeah. So what led to that mindset shift?
The guys at Postale helped me some. Jim Christie there is the COO, and he has an understanding. He's not a coach or whatever, but he had an understanding of what some of the things we needed to start to know to be successful. And he's worked with lawyerists and some of those groups that do a nice job of coaching attorneys out there. He started giving me homework, like how many hires did you have last year? How many, can you figure out how many consults you did? And so I started to make sort of rudimentary Excel spreadsheets that he would say, okay, I want to know how many consults you did last year. I want to know how many hires you did last year. I want to know what your closing percentage was. And then he's like, now I need you to try to figure out, what was your average case value? Can you figure that out?
Yeah.
And I found Clio. Thank goodness. Clio, huge savior for me. My wife found them so we started with Clio on January 1st, 2018. So so now we got a way to track numbers, because in Clio you can track anything basically.
Yeah.
So that was a big get. So switching to Postale, they started talking to me about numbers, getting Clio. And then the next big jump was we didn't have any associates or anything from 2015 to 2019. I'm doing all the work. My wife's still up here working her butt off, trying to help me. I've got varying paralegals. I'm hiring straight out of paralegal school that I'm paying not much, that aren't very good, that aren't staying very long before somebody in Raleigh go picks them up for $10,000 or $15,000 more dollars than I'm paying them. And, that happens. I'm not charging enough. I now know, you know what I mean? I'm still charging what everybody else is charging. So I'm not charging a premium. But the next big jump came in 2019 when I went and hired an associate who had 10 years experience in Raleigh, who was a very good lawyer. I hired her and I doubled the business overnight.
Wow. What a great hire.
Because I could do more consults, and she could actually run an independent caseload, and she was a very good lawyer, and she had a little bit of a name and a little bit of a following from the work she had done for herself and a couple of law firms in Raleigh.
Yeah. Wow.
But I hired her in August of 2019, and this thing is rolling, and we all know what happens in March of 2020.
Yeah. So wait. So you was she your only other lawyer other than you in your law firm in 19 at the beginning?
Yeah, in 19, right? Okay. Yeah.
Wow. So you've grown from 2 in 19 to the 6th today.
Correct. Yeah.
Plus you. Okay.
Plus me.
Wow.
Right.
Okay. So I interrupted you. You were telling the story. So we get into COVID. Yeah. And that happens, right?
Yeah. COVID happens. And coming out of COVID, she decided she didn't want to do all the driving around to the different counties anymore. She got an opportunity to go back in Raleigh and stay in Raleigh, where she wouldn't have to go. We covered 3-4 counties. Sometimes, it was an hour from her house to court. So she got an opportunity where she could stay where she was at. And so she left me in June of 2020. And then we've hired a series of associates since then. We had a lot of turnover. We had the Great American quit out and all of that. We probably weren't providing enough support for the young lawyers we were hiring. We hired some of the wrong people because we were desperate. You don't want to be hiring in crisis. I was hiring in crisis because I had all this work, and it was like whack-a-mole with the attorneys, and that was unfortunate as far as that's concerned. But we continue to grow despite the turnover. We continue to grow. The rest of 2020, we didn't really do much. We did as much in the first 3 months of 2020 as we did the whole rest of the year. And that's just how it went. The courts were closed. Thank goodness I was doing family law, because the thing that kept me alive in COVID was emergency custody and domestic violence restraining orders. And those two things are what kept us alive, because as soon as these moms out there heard the courthouse was closed, these men were being told, you'll see your kid when a judge tells me.
Yeah.
And fortunately, out in the suburbs, the judges were very willing to give us status quo emergency orders that allowed these parents to get their time back with their children. And then, of course, domestic violence protective orders, that never stops. And domestic violence doesn't stop. It's horrible. So we were able to sort of live off of that.
Did you see an uptick in the domestic violence cases during 20?
I saw an uptick in the ones that hired me, but I don't know if there was an uptick in the number that were filed. I don't keep up with the courthouse stats, but I was very fortunate. We did hire an attorney coming from Kansas who was waiting to pass the bar as a paralegal, or he's waiting to be waived into the bar. And he came and helped us for the back half of 2020 and did a really good job for us there. Early 21, we hired another associate, and he stayed about a year, and he did a nice job for us too. So we started to go forward again. I was still doing a ton of work, but the other thing was I needed a coach. And the good thing about COVID was it allowed me time to interview coaches and try to find a coach that would work for me, because this thing was getting to be way bigger than anything that I could manage. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I still didn't have an idea of the numbers. I had this rudimentary Excel spreadsheet that the marketing people at Postali told me to make, but he still didn't answer all the questions that you have to answer to scale to the level that I'm at now, to scale to the level of Sterling Law. You got to have a lot more numbers than what I knew, and you got to be on top of them. You got to be tracking them, and you got to be intentional about it. And I wasn't any of those things, and so I needed a coach. And I interviewed several coaches, including Ernie Sevenson, Ernie the attorney out of New Orleans, who is great for people starting out and offshoring stuff. And if you're small and listening to this, I think he does a great program. But I was a little too big for him, I felt, when I first heard of him and met with him and went to one of his conferences virtually in May of 2020. But I did land on Richard James and Partners Club in May of 2020. And that's been a tremendous help to me, a tremendous success, because I felt like I fit with what he was talking about, and his systems and the numbers you need to know, set leads, set shows, hires, conversion rate, referral rate, paid in full, like what is your collection percentage, all of those types of things that he really focuses on that you have to know to scale. And his focus on providing a client-centered product where the client is the center, and you're trying to provide a high level of service, because we're in the service business and we provide service. And look, we're competing with Amazon, right? Everybody, if we have to understand, the decision to buy a legal service, Jeff, is the same decision as to buy an $8 cup of coffee at Starbucks. It's the same thing. You're going to buy with emotion, and you're going to justify later. So you have to emotionally connect with your clients from the first time you answer the phone to get them to pay you so that you can help them. Because if they don't pay you, you can't help them. And if you don't believe you're helping them, you're in the wrong business.
Right. I should say too that in the intro, I meant to mention that's how you and I know each other's from Richard James's group and all that. So that's how we got connected. So you get on through 20, you get into 21, 22, you start really growing. And once you start getting a grip on your numbers and watching those numbers, then you could start pulling the right levers.
Right. And we started to the first thing we did, and everybody's like, what's the first thing you did when you got in Richard James? And it was fix the phones, right? I didn't have any phone scripts. I had a secretary here answering the phone while she had to deal with the door, and she had to draft documents for me, and she had to run to the courthouse to file stuff. And, the phones and how we answer the phones was an afterthought. So one of the first things I did was get a phone script where we implement the 11 steps that Richard James teaches of a phone call, where we try to build a relationship with the people and gain information. And then I also started to get somebody whose job it was to just answer the phone. And then as we started to get into it, I also tried to, I created a drink menu that looks like a restaurant menu that I should go get one and show it to y'all. But anyway, so when you come in, you're handed a menu like you would get in a restaurant that has all the sodas that I offer and coffees. And I have every soda and every coffee that for when you come in. I have the 5 senses covered in my lobby, right? I've got a smell machine. I've got a water fountain wall that's a logo sign, which also makes sounds and rocks and lights, which are calming, right? I've got different types of candies out there. I have my book that I wrote with the help of Richard James out there, right? So that everything is a nice professional experience. If you've not walked in the front door of your office in the last 3 weeks, do it right now while you're listening to this podcast. What do you see? Is it clean? Are the magazines current? Has it been dusted? Have the tables been wiped down? What is out there for the people to look at? I added a little charging station so you could charge your phone. I mean, one of the Richard James people has a popcorn machine. Think about that, right? Think about, we have to provide a high level of customer service, and lawyers don't. The level of customer service, as Joey Coleman says among lawyers, is a bar laying on the ground. So if you do anything, you can raise it. You know what I'm saying? You got to be thinking that. We're in the service business. So, mastermind that experience.
We're probably close to 100% of our consults being virtual, either on the phone or on video. What's your breakdown?
Mine is about 85% in person.
Oh my, okay.
And we prefer that, because if you drive here and you see my menu and you have my candy and you see my wall and we have a sizzle reel video now where I welcome people to the consult. I tell them a little bit about my history. Each of the associates has 30 seconds in it. And then we play client testimonials before the consult starts, so you can get to know us. You can see other people that look just like you saying how I've changed their lives for the better, that kind of stuff. And you come in, you can see all my awards, power list, top lawyers in North Carolina. You could, whatever. And so you're invested in me more that way in this firm. And people out here in the suburbs, it's still largely, it's the suburbs, but it's based, it's still a rural county. You know what I mean? Like agriculture is still the biggest industry. So people like to look across the aisle, talk to somebody, shake somebody's hand, right? Now, the guys in Raleigh, they're more like you. They're doing almost all their consults virtually, but out here in the suburbs, I prefer to do them in person, as do the clients.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned you're working with Postale, and I know they do your digital part of your practice, and I want to get to your podcast here pretty quickly, but what other, outside of those two channels, what other marketing are you doing?
I have a top listing on Justia that does decently, you know what I mean? Whether it's gold or premium on Justia. I think I've got premium now, which makes me the top Justia person in all of Raleigh. I think it costs $1,200 a month. I do local service ads. We're probably spending $6,000-$7,000 a month on LSAs in Raleigh and in the suburbs out here, Charleston and Harnett counties. At one point, we were getting 7 or 8 to 1 on LSAs. LSAs are getting more expensive and more competitive now, so we're probably down to 4 or 5 to 1 ROI on them, but they're still worth doing for sure. We also do. We have a fine little listing. Nothing spectacular there. But other than that, really not much. The other big change though was, I didn't have, when I got a CRM, right? So the next part of this story is I meet Richard James and I start answering the phones better and I get a dedicated phone person, and then I find Ruby receptionist. So now I can answer the phones 24/7. And Ruby's crazy expensive now, and I'm not with them anymore. I'm with Lex Reception. But if you're not answering your phones 24/7, get Ruby Reception, get Answering Legal. I was on their podcast a few weeks ago. Get Smith AI is a great company out there as well. Like, get somebody to answer your phones 24/7 so that you don't miss any leads, because 80% of the people who get to a voicemail are not going to leave one. And it just doesn't cost that much money given how many leads, because leads come all the time now. So you don't want to miss a lead. But the other thing we did was I learned that I needed to get a customer relation management system, a CRM. I didn't know what that was. So the first thing I got was Clio Grow. And I got the early version of Clio Grow, which is not nearly as good as the current version of Clio Grow. And I'm not with Clio Grow now, but if you don't have Clio Grow, or you don't have Lawmatics, which also works for Clio, or some sort of CRM, whether it be Salesforce or some Salesforce knockoff or whatever, you got to have some sort of lead management system to scale.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that we did to really scale was we went and we started getting people overseas to answer the phones and make outbound phone calls. And the thing is, Jeff, this business has quintupled, I guess might be the word, without any more leads. The leads are about the same. We're just doing a better job with the leads because now we make outbound phone calls. And we have somebody in El Salvador whose job it is to call people who called us that didn't book, didn't set, didn't show, or didn't hire. And we call you for 6 months, because my theory is bad husbands don't get better. And I don't know when you're going to be ready to leave that bad husband. So that's the thing. We're making 600 or 700 outbound phone calls a month, a week, which are leading to sets and shows. And those are just leads that would have been gone. But that makes a big difference too.
Yeah, that's incredible. Good job there. Let me shift over gears to your podcast, which I'm really interested in. So where did you get the idea for this? Describe what it is too.
I got the idea of a podcast because I listen to so many podcasts. The podcasting is growing in the market. And I really, during COVID, I started walking around the neighborhood because I couldn't go anywhere. And I started listening to podcasts. And I really started to really enjoy listening to podcasts. Now I listen to a lot of podcasts. And I thought, I should do a podcast. You know what I mean? Like I like to talk and I talk to different groups. Richard James had a guy, Nick Nanton, came and presented a couple of years ago at one of his conferences. And Nick Nanton is an attorney who doesn't practice law. He's a director, Emmy-winning documentary producer. If you've seen the Dick Vitale documentary on ESPN or the Larry King one on Amazon, those were done by Nick Nanton and DNA Media. And he spoke about how you could take one Facebook Live and you could make that into a podcast, and you could chop it up and have 365 day a year social media content from doing a Facebook Live every week or every 2 weeks. And so that's when I really started to think, okay, that's a model to do it. And his company, DNA Media, has a product that they still have. I think it was $2,400 a month. And they would even transcribe the Facebook Live and turn it into a newsletter. I mean, and that's a good product. And I would tell anybody out there maybe to look up Nick Nanton and DNA. I think they do a really good job. I did not go with them at the time because I didn't have the time. I didn't quite have the employees. Podcasts are a lot of work. It's a lot more work than I ever imagined when I got into it. But then Richard James brought to his conference a guy last year with Push Button Podcast. And he got up and gave a presentation, and he talked about it being more affordable, like $1,500 a month. And he talked about how he did it, and he felt like community podcasts could be very successful for lawyers. And at that same conference, Ben Glass spoke. And Ben Glass, of course, owns Great Legal Marketing. And he talked about some of the stuff they do. And Ben Glass had a podcast, and it's a very good podcast for y'all listening. Great Legal Marketing podcast is excellent. And so that's where I signed up then and said, okay, I'm going to do a community podcast, because I did talk to the people at Postali, and they're like, nobody is really going to listen to you talk about family law all the time. Like they would listen when they have an issue, if they find it, but you won't be able to build a sustained audience if you're just talking about divorce and custody. And they said, and so they thought that Richard Matthews, who owns Push Button Podcast, they thought that the community podcast idea that he was pitching to us was a good one. And so that's where it actually came from. And that's where we went through it. So it's called Best of Johnston County because I'm in Johnston County, North Carolina. And we just interview community people and small businesses about what they do and why they love this area.
Yeah, I listened to some of your episodes and you don't even talk about family law in some of them. You're just getting into where your guest is coming from, what they're doing, how they're doing in the local community, all that.
Correct. Every fourth or fifth episode, we do a special edition episode called Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything, where my social media coordinator, Raina Birch, asks me a series of questions she finds off of the internet that people are searching, and I answer them. But the rest of them are county commissioners, state house members, candidates for county commission, a commercial realtor, a residential realtor. I did a dentist. I did a financial planner. Friends of mine in the area. I did the local parks and rec director. That was the most popular episode because he talked. He talked about some of the new parks they're building, that kind of stuff. And we tag the people that come on and their businesses. It's about 30 minutes, and we do one comes out every Monday. It's on, and Push Button Podcast puts it out to Apple and Spotify, and then we video it. And we put it on YouTube, and then they chop it up for me into 60-second increments, and they put the words on it, then put it out on all my social media channels. So I have 365-day a year social media content with these 60-second cuts coming out of a 30-minute podcast. So the first episode went live at the beginning of November. So we have about 21 episodes up, and we just now, in the last 3 weeks, have spun the podcast off of Breeden Law and made its own thing.
Wow.
So
okay.
The first 3 months, everything was under Breeden Law Facebook, Breeden Law YouTube, Breeden Law TikTok, whatever. Now the Best of Johnston County has its own pages everywhere, and it's its own thing, separate from Breeden Law.
Is it sponsored by Breeden Law? Is that how you
I think it's brought to you by Breeden Law. So,
okay, got it. So just from a mechanical standpoint, you'll record these in your office with your guests being remote as well? Or were you
the guests come in person.
Okay, guests are in person. And Push Button will do all of that you just give them the raw video, they edit it, they put it up on all the platforms. That's really turnkey. Yeah. Okay. And then if you don't mind me asking, what do you pay for that service every month?
I think I'm paying them $1,500 a month.
Okay.
Jeff, they don't provide a host. They don't provide any set. They literally are taking what you upload into a Google Drive and they're working from it. So you have to get your guest, you have to be the host or whatever. Like you have to shoot it. You have to, that's where my social media coordinator comes in, and you have to upload it. So a lot of the work is done by me and my social media coordinator, but they do all the back end. And that's why they can do it for such a reasonable price.
Yeah, I mean, the editing is expensive and they chop all that up. So there's a lot there that goes into it. So now from a standpoint of your long-term vision, what's your long-term vision for the podcast? Where do you see it going, and what would be long-term success?
I'm doing it because I love this community, and this community needs positivity. And I want to shine a light now that I've built a business and I have the financial ability and the time on small businesses in the area that don't have social media marketing, or maybe they don't have social media pages that are doing a great job for the citizens. Because remember, this area is exploding, right? So people are moving here. So I'm trying to help these small businesses and these local officials so people get to know them. Because everybody that lives, well, not everybody, but most of the people that live where I live drive into Raleigh every day to work, and they just sleep here. So they don't really live here. So they don't know. I mean, this is the honest to goodness truth, Jeff. The busiest day at the clerk's office for the phones ringing is the day after jury notices go out, and people are like, where is the courthouse? They may have lived here for 10 years, but the courthouse is in the middle of the county. Raleigh's the other way. They may have never been to where the courthouse is in Smithfield. So I'm trying to promote other small businesses and these local officials that these people do not know who represent them, so that I can educate all of the people that live here that drive to Raleigh every day and really don't know what's going on in their county.
Yeah.
And they don't know the local businesses that can help them here, and they don't have to pay Raleigh prices or drive to Raleigh to get the services, whether it be a dentist, a financial planner, a commercial realtor. We're gonna do somebody who owns a dog supply store, the local dog boarder. We're gonna have them on. Like
everybody loves dogs. That'll be a good episode.
Yeah, right. Like, so that's what I'm trying to do. And if I get some business out of it and it builds my brand, and maybe they become referral sources for me because I promoted them for free and I asked them to come on my podcast, great. And if not, that's okay too, because I got plenty of business. I'm making plenty of money. I'm just trying to do something good for the community.
Yeah, I think people sense that, Jonathan. So you not even trying for those referrals and people talking about you is going to happen naturally because you care and you're investing in the community. From a standpoint of results, what have you seen? And I know it's a new podcast, 4 or 5 months old. So what have you seen by way of results?
Yeah, and it was funny. You asked me earlier this week, you said, I want you to talk about your podcast. I didn't have any of the podcast numbers. So I got some numbers. It has the Best of Johnson County podcast on YouTube, which did not exist as its own separate thing 3 weeks ago, has 219 followers. The podcast has had over 400 downloads in the first 4 months. And for a brand new podcast to get 100 downloads a month is really good, particularly when I'm hyper local. I had 4,082 impressions on YouTube. Somebody watched some part of some video on YouTube in March.
Wow. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Right. And I had 2,452 likes to varying Instagrams, Facebooks, stuff like that. So
that is amazing.
I mean, this
awesome.
for something that didn't exist 4 months ago, where I'm interviewing county commissioners, dentists, financial planners, parks and rec directors. I mean,
you're having way too much fun. You're going to end up quitting law and just being a podcaster by how much fun you're having.
Well, I mean, it's the most fun thing I do right now. And I think you probably think you enjoy your podcast. It's probably the most fun thing you do.
Right now. It is fun. I love it because I get to meet a lot of people and I got an excuse for them to talk to me for 45 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's been great. It's been great. No, and like I said, this county has had some bad publicity. We've got a couple of elected officials who are currently under indictment but won't resign, and they're not been convicted. They're still there, and the media beats them up pretty good and beats the county up pretty good because these people are there. And so this is just another thing to be positive, to try to add positivity in the world about our county and the citizens that are in it, because it's a great place, and just, and to connect, right? To try to connect people, because all these people are new. Like, they didn't live here 5 years ago. They didn't live here 10 years ago. They're not from here. They're from all over the country. So that way, just try to educate.
Well, if I can close on this, Jonathan, just one little question here. You've been very successful in your practice and you've built just an amazing firm and you're having a ton of fun adding value to your community. There's a lot of our listeners are lawyers that are thinking about starting off or just starting off. So what would be a word of encouragement or an experience you could share with them to kind of give them a boost as they contemplate this next step?
Yeah, well, the first thing is, how are you going to get paid? And can you get paid right now? So if you want to come out and you want to do personal injury, that's not going to work as a sole practice thing, because personal injury cases take 18 months to 2 years to pay. If you want to come out and you want to start doing bankruptcy takes often 12, 24, 36 months to get paid, particularly if you're doing a lot of 13s, and it's hard to be a 7 right now. So you can start a bankruptcy practice and you can start a personal injury practice, but you better have something else while you are waiting to start to get paid on some of those 13s on these personal injury cases. So you need to be thinking, what can I charge for today that I can work for tomorrow and get paid? Because the number one reason small law firms fail is a lack of cash flow. The second thing you have to be absolutely aware of is every dollar in overhead is a dollar you have to make before you get paid.
Right.
And so you have to be very cognizant of what your overhead is and what you're spending and what value that cost is bringing to you. And if it's not bringing you value, you don't need it. The third thing I would say is you got to answer the phone. And you got to answer the phone 24/7. And I don't care if you hire Ruby, Lex, Smith AI to answer your phone full time. I know a lot of lawyers that do that are in Richard James. They don't have phone people. They literally let these off-site people answer their phone and book consults all day, every day. You got to get the phones answered and start building a relationship with people. And you got to figure out a way to market yourself. Mm-hmm. And the easiest, freest way is through Google My Business. Optimize your Google My Business page, write blogs and put it on Google My Business, put pictures on Google My Business, use that because it's free, and, optimize to get on that map, because probably my biggest lead source for calls is the maps. My second biggest lead source for phone calls are local service ads. And the maps are 40% of my first time callers.
Well, Jonathan, this has been awesome. So thank you so much for sharing some time with us and just talking about your podcast, your business. You had a great story.
Thanks a lot. And if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me at breedenfirm.com, and be glad to tell them the mistakes I've made. We didn't talk about all the mistakes I made. We talked about the successes, but like I said, I didn't quit. And that's the main thing. Don't quit.
Yeah.
Don't quit.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.